my screen here, it says that we are now broadcasting. So if you can all hear me, please wave. If you can't, blink twice, and then you know how it is in the youth circle. We'll come save you. Okay, I can definitely see you all. Thank you so much for your patience and apologies for that. Before we were cut off, I was just introducing myself. I will be your facilitator. My name is Tumelo Mototwane. I am a news anchor with ENCA, and I'm also a current affairs anchor for #Africa on ENCA. And we will be, of course, engaging in some of the most pertinent issues affecting young people in today's day and age. And, you know, amongst them, of course, being top of mind, COVID-19 and how young people are maneuvering and navigating around this time. But before we get into more of, you know, the details of our conversation, I would just like to please welcome Mum, Dr. Precious Moloi-Motsepe, just to give us an opening and welcome. You know, in some events, they say she will be knighting this event so that we can have more of a fruitful conversation. So, Dr. Precious, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Tumelo, and thank you to all your panel members. I see we've got a really fantastic, robust, youthful panel, and I'm looking forward to hearing all of your deliberations. I also want to welcome all our audience members. Welcome to this webinar hosted by the Motsepe Foundation. We at the foundation really care about young people, about the youth. I grew up in Soweto, and I was in secondary school during the 1976 riots, yes. So when I see what's happening now with the Black Lives Matter movement and what's happening with COVID and what you young people are doing in terms of protesting and wanting to be heard, it really makes me feel inspired and very, very hopeful about the future. At the foundation, we offer bursaries for students because we believe that the future of South Africa is in the hands of young people who will go to school, who will be skilled, who will engage with technology in this fourth industrial revolution era. What makes me sad is that a fifth of our young people, 1/5 of our young people between the ages of 18 and 34 are below the poverty line. That doesn't look good for us. So I'm hoping that at the end of this seminar, yourselves as young people will have come up with strategies around how you would like to see South Africa turning out in the next 20 years, because that's when you will be inheriting this, this country. So Tumelo, thank you very much for engaging young people, and I look forward to a very, very fruitful and successful deliberation. Good luck, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Ma. Thank you, Dr. Precious Moloi-Motsepe, but also for reminding us of the responsibility that we do have as young people to, you know, take from where our forefathers have left off. As you mentioned, you were also part of the Soweto Youth Uprising. The responsibility for the youth of 2020 is to take over from where our forefathers, our ancestors, our senior citizens had left off, and for us to ensure that we create a South Africa that we would all, you know, want to live in. This was also a call by President Cyril Ramaphosa just recently when he engaged with the youth during June 16 this year. He said that it's up to young people to come up with innovative ideas, and, you know, the support should be there then to ensure that young people are indeed empowered to move the country forward. So we're hoping that in as much as we will, as young people, engage on some of the problems and issues and concerns that we see, and that we would like to be, to rather see go away, at the same breath, we do have those solutions. We do have, you know, suggestions, innovations, and ideas to move this country forward. So with that being said, I don't want to waste any time. I'd just like to reintroduce our panelists for our first session. Daphne Ronapio, humanities student at the University of Johannesburg. Daniel Erasmus, law student at the University of Cape Town. Jamie Lee Thomas, a social science student at the University of Cape Town as well. And Fatima Leha, the law and media student at Wits University. You indeed are panelists who will be kickstarting this conversation with us. So I do welcome you once again to this webinar. I want to start with you, Daphne. Stephanie, I mean, how or rather, let me phrase it this way, have we made progress, do you think, with transformation in South Africa for the youth when we specifically look at education? What do you think?
Definitely, we have made progress, and in the sense that if you look at it now in higher institutions, people from different race, gender, and backgrounds can be educated in the same facilities, given our history back where who couldn't mix or associate with each other. So when I see that happening, it's really very commendable. And just to speak as a female Black student, I now have so many opportunities at my disposal to choose to further my studies, from a bachelor to a bachelor level to doctorate level, which is something that couldn't happen back before 1994. People didn't have as much opportunity there. And also, just to speak on the education system, now it's very inclusive in consideration of people from different backgrounds, different languages, faiths and beliefs. And even if you look at the code of conducts right now, they're being revised, amended just to cater for each and every student. And we also see efforts that are being placed to ensure that our educators are well enough trained to handle situations involving different kinds of students.
Right. And we talk about this because we are here as young people learning about the history of the youth of 1976, because their fight was for transformation in education. They were fighting against the Bantu education, the Afrikaans Medium Decree of 1974. So therefore, it shows us that education was a tool with which they wanted to use, to sort of dismantle the apartheid system. So then I have to ask you, Daniel, and bring you into this conversation. What are you then doing to enforce transformation within institutions of higher learning, specifically from where you are?
Well, I attend UCT, and as an institution, it definitely still has a long way to go. There's strong efforts from staff, management, students, and that pushes transformation in different spaces, and that's very important. But as students, we ensure transformation efforts are incorporated into almost all our endeavors. So for example, I'm head student of my residence, and it's a male-bodied residence, so of course that brings challenges. And we've had to face that as leadership. And a common approach is to have, like within social spaces, to have transformation talks. And I think as much as that's very important and it is a necessary tool, it often fails in the sense that it doesn't change the mindset. And we actually have to change people's mindset to be transformation orientated in order to create any substantive change.
Mm. Speaking of that, Daniel, unfortunately, even with the challenges that we had pre-COVID, it seemed almost as if we had another, challenge when it comes to COVID-19, because in my opinion, the pandemic has disrupted the quality of education, or at least the access to quality education. I would see extensively reports coming in of, students not being able to access to study, not being access to, rather being able to access data. Some, due to the digital divide, they still, even with the devices and the data, fail to be able to connect with their tutors, their lecturers, and, their peers in this time. So then, Jamie Lee, I have to bring you in here, talk about how, COVID-19 has affected you personally when it comes to your studies.
So before, I'd like to answer the question on how it affected me and personally in my studies. But I think what is actually very saddened to know about this pandemic is that it actually highlighted the fact that, and it exposed the fact that there was still inequality within South Africa. And if you're talking about being born free in a democratic country, in a democratic nation, we see now that actually that's not the case, because we're still dealing with those type of inequalities where someone like me coming from a middle class or someone from a rural, don't have connectivity to study, where someone else is way better off. And this also stems from coming from, your basic education, those that are not even in high institutions yet. There's that inequality, and where the same struggle that was the same struggle in a apartheid era with regards to those schools not having water, chronicle infrastructure, sanitization, security, the same thing we see here. Pride, like born free, still facing here. There are schools that are not prepared even for the students to even come back, and even now for connectivity and also on ways to do this online learning thing. It's a struggle for us because some of us, we're not even computer literate, you know, in that way. So that affected the youth in that way, the sense that we were never prepared for this, you know, from different social backgrounds. We weren't prepared for this, and now it is here, and so we need to move forward with that. And so it definitely has impacted us in a way that it exposed us to our reality, that actually has things changed. Has it changed? Has it really changed? And I think that's how that impacted me. And I think for many youths out there, because now we need to have handouts from the government, we need data, we need that, we need this. And some of us are even saddened to know that we now need to drop courses to handle the workload, to handle our environments. Our environments are sometimes not conducive, you know, and it's also a struggle between different institutions. This institution may be better well off than that institutions. There's even a struggle with students within the same institutions. This students are better off than that students, you know. And it's those things that really makes you think on this notion of really being a born free, because some people, when you're speaking to having freedom and the same access and the qualities and possibilities that those in the apartheid couldn't have and our ancestors couldn't have, then you look at today and you're like, but what access and what equality really? So I think it has affected.
You mentioned a very important theme there of inequality and how this pandemic has exposed, you know, the big gap between the haves and the have-nots. And you know, the most vulnerable who are at this stage, in this context, the youth, really felt the brunt at this time. I mean, I saw young South Africans who were quite unsure about the prospects of their future, be it in academics or even in employment. They just didn't know what was going to happen, because here is someone living in probably a rural community in South Africa who cannot access a device, cannot access data due to their geographic location. Even the connectivity doesn't allow them to enjoy, you know, the benefits that come with e-learning. And if you come from a point of privilege, it's okay and very comfortable for you to say, oh, we've got e-learning, we can commence with work. For a huge portion of our youth population, that is a struggle, you know, as you mentioned, Jamie. But Fatima, then I have to come to you and talk to you about e-learning. E-learning has been sort of encouraged in South Africa, and I'm sure from around the world during this pandemic, but in a more South African context, has it been beneficial for the young South African student?
So e-learning has been incredibly difficult. The entire process from start to finish, for that of students, for that of educators, lecturers have found it, because it was a new system that was developed and everyone was learning it for the first time. Along with the actual challenges faced with the e-learning came the challenges of access. Many students didn't have access to data or to laptops. So from my perspective at Wits University, Wits tried its best to accommodate and with various mobile networks to ensure that students had data, as well as by giving students laptops. But the issue came in as well with international students, because the laptops couldn't reach international students. So there was that divide. Then came the issue of, yes, you give a student a laptop, you give a student data, but the working environment itself is not conducive, because students are so used to being at in the library or at a residence where they alone or have a perfect conducive environment for learning. And then to go home, and the majority of South Africans aren't going home to a luxurious house with perfect conditions. It's going to be a bedroom that you share with multiple siblings. It's an environment that is occupied by many. When you go home, you're probably going to be told about chores, or because it's a pandemic and finances are an issue, as well as parents not being able to provide because of job losses during this time. So all of these things add stress and affects the mental health of students, together with e-learning, because the process itself, trying to learn, was exceptionally difficult. The mental health has already been an issue going into the pandemic, prior to the pandemic. So the pandemic itself has just exacerbated the crisis that already had existed, and the added challenges of finance, academia, all of those things. And because the curriculum wasn't shortened, it was the exact same content, course loads, that sort of thing, as well as back-to-back tests and assignments. Students found it overwhelming because you're learning the system, you're coping with a pandemic, you're coping with all the extra mental health issues and stress that's adding to what's already a difficult environment. So I won't lie, there's been multiple challenges. I think we're still facing challenges, and multiple students have also dropped out because the challenges were just too much. Finances were an issue and they couldn't carry on, sort of thing. It's been very tough.
Right.
However, this has opened for residences recently, so that's created a bit of a band-aid solution, but it's a bit easier because students have a better environment currently as it stands.
So you mentioned a lot of issues there that students are going through right now, Fatima. I'm thinking of mental health. This is, remember, pre and during COVID-19. So this is not unique to the pandemic. Students have already been, going through these challenges. But I think even with the pandemic and the lockdown, as you've mentioned, it's just exacerbated that experience. So mental health, you have international students right now probably stuck in their home countries wanting to come back and study. You have different stakeholders such as the Department of Higher Education and Learning. You have different institutions of higher learning who are also learning as they go, because this pandemic has sort of brought everyone to their knees in terms of just coming up with solutions on the go. So then I have to ask you, Daphne, and bring you back into this conversation. What are then some of the worries and concerns of young people, including yourself, at this time, particularly about their future?
Just to highlight a few, there's quite many worries that we have as students, but just we obviously worry about employment, especially myself as a university student. I always worry about what now after university or after tertiary school, would I be able to get employment to support myself, support my family? Will I be able to pay my bills as a young person? And I know some students, they took loans. They also worry about whether they're going to be able to pay for their loans, or are they going to find themselves already in debt before they even start working? So that's something that some of the worries. And currently, we're also worried about will we be able to learn and excel perfectly during this pandemic? We will be able to finish our studies and graduate. And just to, in a general sense, I'm sure the high school students right now, the matrics are very worried whether they'll be able to excel and matriculate and get into the university. And these worries, they come up, they worry us a lot, because we also worry that what will happen in the future if what if the pandemic carries on? What if this thing does not stop? What if it carries on for 2 more years or 5 years? Or even if it stops now, what if it comes back again? How will we be able to cope with the stress that comes there? Because it has been quite such a stress to get through in our academics. But just to divert a little bit and focus on female students, and I'm sure I'm speaking for every student that we worry about our safety all the time in general. We just live in constant fear. We're always scared to get sexually assaulted, gender-based violence. We always have to be cautious about where we're going, how we're getting there, who are we surrounding ourselves with, who are we associating ourselves with, because we can easily become a victim once you step out of your home, step out of your comfort zone. So that's something that we are worried about. Besides employment, we're worried about our safety, we're worried about academics, and whether we'll be able to be okay in the future. Those are some of the worries that we have as the youth.
And you know what, definitely those concerns and worries are validated, because we have seen, statistics showing us that female students, as part of the vulnerable group of women and females in South Africa, are indeed targets to perpetrators in this country. They are victims of gender-based violence. It comes to mind, a student from the University of Cape Town who unfortunately had to lose her life so tragically and senselessly, I have to say so, in a community where she's meant to feel protected as a female. But unfortunately in 2020, that is not a reality. So Daniel, then it brings me to my next question about, social activism. And, I termed, this generation the woke youth generation, because the word woke keeps coming up in social spaces where constantly, if you are not sort of like conscious of either where you come from or conscious about the reality in your country, you're quick to be called out to say, hey, you need to be woke, wake up and see what the realities are. So I want to talk to you about your thoughts on, the woke youth generation and social activism that we usually see on social media. Is it effective? Is it enough just in amplifying the youth voice?
So firstly, the term the woke youth generation, I think as a term, it's quite an interesting way of putting it, because it highlights both negatives and positives. So it highlights the somewhat ineffectiveness of it as like just a slogan, but also all the positives and how the youth is aware. The youth there's a lot of passion in the youth. There's also a general training for youth to care about issues beyond our immediate circumstances, which is very important, I think, in creating any change. There have also been a lot of efforts by youth to break down stereotypes. There's still a lot of work to do, but the fight is there. And we also see that beyond social media activism and the activism that happens on social media, youth do take things into their own hands. Now with COVID around, it is a bit difficult to have any action beyond just social media, really. But we've seen, like in the past, with Fees Must Fall, GBV protest, there's a lot of actual work being done by youth, and I think that alone shows that the stuff on social media is actually reflected in our actions as youth. But we must also, as youth, we must be very careful to not over exaggerate or the effect of what we've done, because that can lead us to thinking that we've actually created change, when actually things can just still be the same, and we are within an echo chamber on our social media spaces.
Yeah, and that nicely then transcends to my question to you, Jamie Lee, because I mean, before social media, when we see protests, we expect sort of a mob in the streets, physically holding placards. In the South African context, just in comparison to other countries, we usually in song, chanting, what our demands are. And I think you can agree with me that we tend to confuse our global counterparts because they're not sure if we're angry or happy, because South Africans have a very unique way of being in song, even when they are demanding their answers, being in song, even when they are hurting. But I want to bring the same question to you, just in terms of social media and the youth participation and role thereof. If you think that it's been, effective in highlighting some of the issues, that young people are going through, connecting young people who may be in different provinces, different universities, but in one accord. One example being that of, roads must fall that we've seen back in 2015, hashtag fees must fall, no matter in which institution of higher learning you were. Through that hashtag on social media, you just felt a sense of community.
Well, to some extent, I would say yes, definitely. But I'd first like to highlight, if we're asking, is social media activism effective in amplifying the voice of the youth? Well, to some extent, no as well. Because with regards to inequality as well, there are some youth that do not have the platform to really voice out their concerns, right? And if we're talking on the basis of youth as well, we need to talk on inclusivity and making sure that no one is left behind. So there are all of those who don't have that platform, and those that are really at the base of the problems, at the base of gender-based violence, at the base of poverty, that, their voices are not really being heard. However, those who have that access, they're the ones that are doing most of the uproar or talking, So in that sense, I would say no. But yes, there has been, to a large extent, there has been. And with regards to, the tools that us as youth we use, we mostly on social media, Twitter, Facebook, all of these we have used, and also in the form of hashtags. And hashtags has become a big thing for social mobilization, because essentially that hashtag that can just display that movement. It just highlights everything that you want in that movement. For example, roads must fall, fees must fall, am I next? And also us as the youth, we've used that to really raise our voice, and we've really become stronger in that regard, because now we are doing this thing where we're doing the storytelling on social media. So everyone has a story and they put that hashtag there, and because everyone is also retweeting and the threads are going, and even on Twitter there's this thing of threading. Well, you can have your story, but the next one, the next person will retweet that, and so it causes an uproar, it causes for exposure of what's happening, and that then has so much power. And if you look at now, discrimination against racism and homophobia attacks, that social media as the youth, what we have done is, and you can see this happening, the transition, what we have done is we have exposed that. So it's now when someone posts something that has been discriminated, people are quick to post that or retweet them and say, but this is wrong, this shouldn't be right. And just recently in the week, I've seen something where someone has posted something that was very transphobic and someone else has posted against that, and it made an uproar because people were tweeting against that, to the point that that person had to take what that person said away, as well as and apologize. And that's not something we've seen in the past. That's not things we've seen, but now we see where people are retracting what they say and actually thinking before actually posting something. So social media in that way has done a lot for us as youth. It has gave us a voice, a much stronger voice. But for some, if we're comparing those in the decades who actually fought in the struggle, and to now, some would argue that actually social media it's called slacktivism, where it's like a lazy form of social movement, where just because I'm sending a hashtag, or just because someone is retweeting something, that's now a form of supporting a movement. And some are arguing against that, because if you look in history, they fought for him. Lives are on the line, you know. Even in Black Lives Matter, it's COVID-19, but the youth are still going out. And the youth are still, they're still doing the most. They're still fighting in the front lines, while others are just sitting back, I'm waking up, I'm retweeting. So there's that argument as well.
Yeah. I'm going to ask then the last question to you, Fatima, but just a reminder that for all our audience members and, everyone at home watching virtually, and I can see some of the chats there as you participate in this conversation, we'll then be having a Q&A session where you can ask specific questions to our panelists just after hearing what they had to say on these various issues. And then after, we will get, of course, closing remarks from our panelists. But Fatima, then, I want to pick up from where Jamie had just left off, just in terms of, social media activism, so to speak, and some of the, the pros and cons that come with it. And I suppose, this comes from the back of the youth of 1976 having a definite cause that they were fighting against. As mentioned, that was Bantu education. The 2015 youth saying, hashtag fees must fall, hashtag roads must fall. And then we also see with the youth, with hashtags Black Lives Matter, hashtag Am I Next. Those were some of the hashtags that were trending on social media. Just in terms of the youth of 2020, what do you think their fight is? What are they fighting for? What are they fighting against?
So the youth of 2020, I feel like it's not one situation, because we need to realize that all of our fights are intersectional, because as a woman, you face gender-based violence. As a Black woman, you face gender-based violence as well as racism. So the struggles are all internalized. And personally, I think our fight for 2020 is that of gender-based violence, is that of systemic racism, is that of free decolonized education, is that of climate justice. If I can just elaborate on each thing a bit, in terms of gender-based violence, last year, we protested the Am I Next protest at Wits University, and this year, nothing has changed. It's still the same situation in terms of gender-based violence. If we look at statistics, 1 in 5 women, 1 in 10 children will die at the hands of a man. If we elaborate a bit, it gets even scarier, because you realize every 36 seconds, a woman is raped. The likelihood of rape for a woman is greater than a woman actually learning how to read in this country. And that's how bad it is. And these aren't statistics that that should be attached to our country. I feel like there's no change that's been happening. Yes, we've said that this needs to be implemented and that needs to be implemented, but systematically there hasn't been any change. Women live in fear. Every time a woman has to get onto a taxi, get on call in Uber, they're not sure whether they're going to make it home alive. And that shouldn't be a fight in 2020, however it is. And it is something that we need to tackle. We need to call out rape culture. We need to call out friends. We need to discuss gender-based violence at every opportunity that we can get. And then there's this thing of we always ordering rape whistles, we ordering pepper sprays. Yes, I'm not saying it's not important, but however, I feel like the issue needs to be tackled at the root cause. I feel like the issue is now on the onus is now on men. Men need to take up the fight. They need to educate themselves as well as their friends, and they cannot be afraid to call out their friends and family members as well, because if we are to eradicate gender-based violence and femicide, it needs to be a fight that is taken on by men just as much as by women. And we need to be serious about it, because serious action needs to be taken place. We cannot go on as normal in a country when a femicide is taking place around us. In terms of decolonized education, every year we have the same issues around accommodation. We have the same issues of NSFAS. We have the same issues of readmission. It's the same issues, but however, we need to understand that the root cause is that of free decolonized education. Education can't be a luxury that's afforded only to a minority. In a world like ours, moving into a fourth industrial revolution, higher education needs to be a basic right. Students are given the opportunity, minorities, underprivileged students are given the opportunity via NSFAS, but that puts students at a back foot, because coming into the system, you already have a step back because the system is against you. The stress you face won't be that of the person sitting next to you in a lecture room. You have that of accommodation to fight for, food, the lack of resources. It's a systemic issue that we need to tackle as well. Then comes the issue of structural racism. The generation before us fought for the end of apartheid. Our fight lies in the systems left behind. The recent Black Lives Matter movement has been a fight which has been taken up by the youth. And what's so beautiful, I feel, about this movement is recently on Sundays, we've had the Black Lives Matter protest at Constitutional Hill. And for the first time in South Africa, I've seen that it wasn't one race at a protest. It was a diverse, a racially diverse group of people all fighting for the same goal. And I feel like that gives us hope, because it shows that this generation is serious about issues, that we want to create a better life for all.
All right, Fatima, I think you've said just a mouthful in terms of highlighting some of the issues that young people have been, tackling. And I've personally also seen young people being at the front lines. Just recently, even in Pretoria, 2 girls' schools, also being highlighted as problematic in terms of, the racism experience there, the homophobia, the xenophobia. And we're seeing young people outside dressed in black at the front line, during COVID-19 saying, we will go out and ensure that our voices are heard. So, to all, our attendees, virtual guests attending right now, I'm sure you've been hearing just different perspectives provided by our leaders, and I've been seeing some of the questions being asked. This is an opportunity for you to still slot in your questions just before we wrap up this conversation. And then I'll be reading out these questions that, our youth leaders joining us virtually have been, just writing down and prepping for you. So I'm going to go to our Q&A, and then I will direct them specifically to the panelists as I see the question, and please answer it as briefly as possible so that we can still have enough time to get your closing closing remarks, and hopefully that will be more solution driven, to say we've highlighted these problems. Where do we go now? What do we do? What responsibility is upon young people to ensure that they create the South Africa that they wish to live in? All right, so I want to start this first question, which is directed to you, Daniel. This question comes from Hafeni Kashimbonde. I hope that I've pronounced your name correctly. If I haven't, my apologies. But this question is for Daniel, and the question says, UCT is an African and global institution. Do you, Daniel, think they are doing enough to promote transformation in class, and where do you think they can improve? Daniel?
So doing enough is it's a term. It's very tricky because I don't think anyone can ever be doing enough per se. But the UCT does do a lot. But in there, I think they released their transformation report for last year. I think yesterday or the day before. They actually said in one of their challenges was that there's a disheartening institutional culture and exclusionary practice in the organizational structures. So I think that highlights what actually needs to be changed, and that is the organizational structures. And that is a major change that needs to be happened. And in terms of that, I don't think UCT are doing enough there.
Thanks, Daniel. All right, let me just look for the next question here. And perhaps, Daphne, because this question doesn't have a name, I'll direct it to you. Okay. This question is from Nolo Muloi, and they ask, the biggest issues I foresee with online learning is that human interaction will be limited, to people of different classes, or rather people of different classes won't mix in the long run. It will create a huge social divide and make people socially awkward. What are your thoughts there, Daphne?
It's quite true. It's quite true that when we do the online, we're going to lose that human interaction and we won't be able to mix as we used to enjoy before COVID-19. But it's also a good thing in a way that even though there is a pandemic, for example, if ever we're going to continue like this, we can still carry on with our lives, we can still carry on with school, and people can still do work remotely, and then the world does not come to a stop. But it's just quite unfortunate that with the online learning, with the online interaction, we lose that human contact, and that's the negative part of it. But it's also quite good, because then we can still continue with our lives. We can still, even now we're doing it right now, we're still conversing through Zoom and all of that, and we still are able to share our views and our thoughts and what we think through Zoom and something like that. So it is quite a shame that maybe if on the online thing it's going to make us lose and become socially awkward, but it's also a good thing. It's a solution to an extent as to how we can also carry on with our lives.
Right. Thank you so much for that, Daphne. Let me come to the next one. And I see here it's directed to you, Jamie Lee, and it's more of a comment, and perhaps you can also just elaborate on that. Now, Osas Asemota said that I 100% agree with Jamie Lee. A lot of folks are performative on social media. They do it so that they don't get cancelled or outed for not speaking out or speaking up. Jamie Lee, what do you think about performative social media activism? What do you think about the cancel culture and also just people being called out generally on social media?
So I think the cancel culture is not that effective. The reason why I say so, I mean, most of the times it's those people that have the high following and then, they say something bad, and now we want to cancel them, and we retweet them and these things, and we make memes about it, but then the next day, they still got the high following. They still got people supporting them, like nothing has changed. It's still the same. So in that way, yeah, that's my intake. In that way, it's not really effective in that regard.
All right then. Thanks, Jamie Lee. Fatima, I want to come to you with this. An interesting question that we're hearing here. We're getting here rather. It's from Scenes by Zina. And they ask, what do the panelists, but I'll direct it to you, Fatima. It says, what do the panelists think about stopping the academic calendar?
With regards to stopping the academic calendar, I feel I have mixed views on this, because there are students who who need to graduate, and then there's the coming in of students from grade 12 who need to come into university structures and that sort of thing. But I also feel like if we are to take a stance on social justice, we need to ensure that our decisions are equal for all. And as it stands, the large majority has not been able to access online learning, has not had access at a basic education level and at a higher education level. And I feel like if it means stopping the academic calendar to ensure access and to ensure that we can bridge the divide so that we all are able to start equally at a time when either the pandemic has lessened or at a time when we can go back to school, ensuring social distancing and that sort of thing. But I definitely feel as it stands and the way it looks, the academic calendar should be stopped to ensure that everyone is on an equal footing.
All right. Thank you so much, Fatima, for that. I'm going to go back to you, Daphne. All right. I want to go back to you, Daphne, and ask this question to you that's coming up here. I don't think it was necessarily directed to anyone. All right. Actually, let me take this one, which I see is directed to you. This is from Anonymous. It says, Daphne, you said that you are unsure about your future after you graduate, as there is no guarantee. Oh my goodness. All right. I'm losing it. Let me just look for it again. There we go. I'll pause it there. All right. It says, Daphne, you said that you are unsure about your future after you graduate, as it is no guarantee that you will be able to find employment. You also stated that other students have taken out loans and have no guarantee that they will have employment to pay them back. Do you not agree that us as the youth, and even more importantly as Africans, should rather get into an entrepreneurial mindset so that we can bring in wealth into the continent and create employment?
Actually, I do agree. I do agree with that question, because already, if I may just share some of my experience or my peers' experiences, I've had friends or peers who graduated from our institution, who graduated in 2018, and they haven't been able to find employment. So that has forced them to innovatively start something. So I have a friend who started a consultation on interior designing, something that she didn't study for though, but she started it, and it's now a company that where she goes and then she offer consultancy, and she goes and design in people's homes and in B&Bs and all of that. She had to do that because of that fear of not finding employment in the sector that she studied for, in the field that she studied for. So I do agree with that a lot, that we need to have more entrepreneurs to start our own businesses. And I see it now, right now, it's quite beneficial to do consultancy because we are doing everything online. So you can offer your services, or you can render your services online. You can consult with someone can come to you and ask for advice, and you can consult them through Zoom or however, or through social media. And also it's also beneficial because we can also use internet. We have internet at our disposal. You don't necessarily need to go to an advertisement house. You actually can use social media to advertise your business. That's letting everyone know about what you're doing, and maybe therefore get investment and get customers and those people that can help your business to grow, and also offer employment to other youth who don't have employment.
And just to add on that, Daphne, I'm looking forward to the second session because we're going to delve into entrepreneurship in more detail, some of the challenges with which young entrepreneurs right now are experiencing, but also the opportunities, as you've mentioned, that the gig economy and the digital economy is offering young people right now that I think Africa needs to tap into. All right, let me come to you, Daniel. Now, this question is from Faith Shine. Faith asks, what is your take on the government or even the Department of Education to make such an important tool as education become a matter of choice by allowing parents to choose whether to send their kids back to school or not for safety reasons under the pandemic? Do you think it is problematic on its own, and it also in a way causes conflict and confusion from both a learner or a parent?
So yeah, I think giving parents the choice was important. I think from a health and safety perspective, to force people to risk their lives, it would never be wise of the government to put people at risk. But it does obviously have effects on students' education and the control of parents over the child and the best interest of the child as well. I don't actually have a problem with what the government did there. I think it was a good decision in the circumstance.
All right. Well, thanks, Daniel. Jamie, I'm going to come to you, and then Fatima will take your question as well, which will be the last two questions, and then we'll take your closing remarks from all of you, just in a stance of way forward, right? And we'll have to make way for the second session. So to you, Jamie Lee, this question says, I would like to believe that outside of activism, policy development is a key proponent of social change. For the youth to be able to shape an ideal and all-inclusive world that bridges inequality, they would have to be able to access the spaces in which these policies are created. What can we, as the youth, then do to pressure universities and government institutions to collaborate to form some kind of pipeline from learning institutions to governmental and political spaces so that transformation and reform can be pioneered by the youth through policy? All right, this one comes from Ustandile Sigalala. What do you think, Jamie Lee?
I think that is basically what I stand for as a youth, and my quote essentially is that the youth shall govern, and that the youth must govern. We must put ourselves in that position to stand up for what is right against what is wrong, and to use every platform that we can to instill what is needed. And I think that's important. We should find ourselves at the platforms, at the forefront, making decisions, making policy decisions, writing responses to drafts and policies, and taking that platform and saying, look, this is wrong, this is our voices, this, and putting pressure on the government in that regard, you know. And we are grateful for what the previous generation has done for us, but now it's our time to stand up for ourselves. And it's our time not to stand up for ourselves in a sense of, you know, but this thing of, you know, helping someone else as well, advocating for one another, standing together, because essentially we are stronger together than what we are apart. And we've seen that even in the Soweto riots, they were stronger together than what they were apart, you know, and that even caused an uproar. And so even today, you know, past social media activism and all of, we need to stand together with one thing and not just let a group of people run at the forefront, and when they eventually succeed and then it becomes a good thing, and not just letting, when it gets to a point where like the government, when for instance, gender-based violence has been a problem, an issue for many years, but now it took a death of a youth in University of Cape Town to now cause an uproar of us youth, and now it became a thing. But those were the problems that they were there in the beginning. So as the youth, we should continue to identify those problems and stand up and support each other and expose it, because when we're together, a lot can be done. We've seen that with the Roads Must Fall movement. We've seen that with fees. So we should take that and move forward with that, and we should learn from the previous youth that has done so much for us, and not stop there, and not have this mentality of, you know what, I can just sit back, they can do everything for me. You know what, you know, we need to work together with us, and we need to use the platform that has been given. For instance, being able to speak right now as I'm speaking here, and not being afraid of, oh, I don't know too much words, oh, I don't, maybe I'm not educated enough, maybe you know, not being afraid of your background, where you come from, who you are, what words you know, what words you don't know, but using that platform, and even using social media, using what you have to just,
but our outcomes is just largely shocking.
Make a change, right? Thank you so much, Jamie Lee. And Fatima, I have to ask you to please be very brief with your answer so we can get the last closing remarks. My time here says that we are 6 minutes towards the end of our session, so I need to make sure that you answer, and then we still get, you know, sort of a closing last remark from you. But this question from Osas Asimota says, how do we deal with people who purposefully hold a more conservative view, such as homophobia and transphobia, racism, many others? We cannot always have transformation talks. At what point do we institute action? And they say non-violent, of course.
So this is something that's actually very close to my heart, because I feel as though the older generation has been is a lot more conservative in their thinking. And I feel it's our fight as the youth to dismantle these thought processes, but also to do it in a way of educating and enforcing unlearning. So just as much as we educate, we need to unlearn. We need to have these discussions on our supper tables, on our dinner tables. We need to constantly be engage with your friends, engage with your family, older members, because I feel like the only way that we are going to create a society that we believe in is to do so in a manner where of education, to dismantle those thought processing. Yes, and I feel like talk to whoever you can about the issues that are close to you. When someone says something, immediately, if it's derogatory, if it's a stereotype, stop it there and then. Don't let it carry on. Don't say, oh, but that uncle or that person's always like that. No, stop it there and then. It's our job as the youth to end and put an end to these systems of oppression. And I feel that we can through education and unlearning.
Thank you so much, Fatima. All right. Thank you so much to all the participants that have asked their questions and have engaged. I mean, there's so many questions. And I can see here, Aliyah Dogmore saying, thank you, panelists, for an insightful discussion. We're just going to get closing marks from each and every one of you just before we wrap up our discussion. And I want to start with you, Daphne, and talk to you about, I mean, we've spoken about, social activism, about education, about, entrepreneurship, technology, but I think as well, we need to talk about other, sort of non-tangible issues such as love, peace, and just a sense of community. And I wanted to ask you, what are you doing then to promote, those things, love, peace, social justice amongst your circle, amongst your peers, that you feel would be a takeaway for us as the rest of the youth?
Just personally to talk as a student, and if I may speak about whenever I'm on campus, whenever I'm in lectures, and I always try my best, and if my peers can testify to this, that to take into consideration the fact that we are all different and be very respectful to people towards if we're discussing, if they have a different opinion to what I have, I should be able to take it with respect. And also when I express myself, my views and opinion, they're not in a manner that undermine others or that comes off as offensive or amount to hate speech or entice hate. So in my personal spaces, I always try to show support, whether it's with my friends, my siblings, and just always be upfront and always be ready and confident enough to stand up for what's right. I wouldn't turn a blind eye on social injustice or an issue just in fear that people will heavily criticize me or reprimand me for doing so. So knowing that I'm speaking up for the right thing and I'm doing the right thing, I always make sure that I am standing up, even if someone judges me about it and someone reprimands and says, why are you saying this? It's because it's the right thing to do. I'm not afraid. So I would just like to continue to encourage my peers to always offer a listening ear to one another, because it's important to listen. And there are so many people who are going through quite a lot, and they don't have anyone to support them or anyone to listen to them. So always be ready to take a stand. Always be ready to offer help when you can. Right now we can't do much because we are obviously under lockdown. But as soon as maybe whenever the lockdown is lifted, we can engage in community engagement and volunteering. Right. There's so many charities out there where it's not necessarily all about the money, but it's just being there, going in. If I may give an example for myself, in my area, there is a rape and trauma charity where you just need to go there and then spend time with the victims. They feel better. They feel as if they have someone to talk to and they can open up about their experiences. And you as well as an individual can also learn from them and see how you yourself can do better, do more, and how you can also protect yourself from certain things that they have gone through. So I feel like that's what I personally been trying to do, trying to get more in community engagement. And I'm really quite proud when I see around campus, for example, people from groups of friends. They have different people from different races, different sexual orientation, like just different genders. Everybody just mixed up. It makes me so proud to be exposed to such an environment, to see people, everyone being together without any judgment.
I appreciate, the call to action to check on each other, because, pandemic has really made it a very lonely time for most people. And that sense of community is actually important for one's mental health, to know that we are still in this together. We are still carrying this cross together, and we'll get to the end of, this tunnel together. So thank you so much for highlighting that. And just my appeal then to the rest of the panelists to please keep it as brief yet impactful as possible, so we can make way to our second session, which is still happening immediately after this session has wrapped, and our next panelist will then come to the fore and join us. So I would appeal to all our virtual guests and participants who've been sending questions to please still stay tuned, because you're absolutely going to thoroughly and equally enjoy the next session. So to you, Daniel, then I wanted to ask you, just in closing, what kind of South Africa do you wish to live in, and what are you doing, and what do you think the rest of us can do to carve out that South Africa that we all wish to live in?
Thank you for the question. So ideally, I would like to live in South Africa. As first and foremost, it's socialist. It operates on a socialist system, because as much as entrepreneurship and all of that is very important, and within the system we're in right now, it's probably one of the only and best ways to do things. But to actually achieve what we have been speaking about throughout the session, to actually achieve that inclusivity, that access to opportunities, we cannot operate in the current capitalist system that we have. And personally, what I'm doing regarding changing that and carving that future, I'm involved in the economic freedom fighters as well as the student command, and we do our goal is to achieve socialism and economic freedom for all persons in this country. So yeah, that's the South Africa I would wish to live in.
Oh, thank you so much, Daniel. And to you, Jamie Lee, I want to talk about, your advice to the born-free youth, particularly at this time, that may feel hopeless, that may feel helpless, and say, it's easy to have these conversations, but the truth is we're not in positions of power. We're not in positions of influence. We are still young. What do I do from where I am in my community as a born-free? Jamie Lee? We seem to have lost your audio there. Jamie Lee, I'm struggling to hear you. Can you hear me, Jamie Lee?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Hear you now. Yes, we can hear you now.
Can you please repeat the question? I lost my connection there.
Oh, okay, no worries. I just wanted to know your advice then to born-frees, right? Who may feel like, listen, we are young, we are quite disempowered, we're not in positions of influence and power to create that, quick, tangible change that we want to see. And they feel quite hopeless, just from, where they are in their community, in their little bedrooms, and feel like, at this point, I'm hopeless. What would you advise them to do? What would you say to them?
Well, my advice for them would to be that they are not hopeless, and to really dig deep within themselves, because everyone has potential, and to find that potential within this struggle. And it is when they find that potential within this struggle that we should come together and be supportive and reach out. And that's one thing I've also learned, even within my situations, being a student, moving back home, struggling with certain things, especially with studying in conducive environments. And I speak for many people who are going through much worse things, is just to know that reach out, and we should stand with each other. And I'm going to say that again. And just to know that, when you open up your mouth and you reach out, that it's not a bad thing, and yeah, just to fully go with your potential, because we all have something in us, and that is when we look at our situation, but we don't just talk on behalf of ourselves, but we recognize with everyone else's struggle. And before coming even into this discussion, I made sure that I don't come prematurely only on my views and my perception, because being born free, being a youth means many different things to many different people. So recognizing that there's that difference, but still being inclusive of everyone, and just sharing that love, that hope, and taking that platform to stand and to advocate for other people. And I think that's important, to stand together, and to reach out. And yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that word of advice, Jamie Lee. And Fatima, just in closing, you're the last panelist to give us your closing remarks. And my question to you is, how do you think we as the youth can practically create an equal society that, you know, has equal opportunities for all of us? Because it's easy to point fingers. It's easy to say it's the responsibility of, you know, our forefathers who came before us. They should have done better. They should have carved better legislation. They should have. The reality is we are here now, and it is in our hands. You know, we have a responsibility to also take action. So how can we practically do that, carving out that society that has equal opportunities for all of us?
So I think action can be taken in two ways. I think the first way, which we disregard most of the time, and I feel which is the most important, is that we need to begin with ourselves. We need to work harder on ourselves than on anything else that we do. We need to dismantle the systems of oppression that exist within us, and we need to unlearn habits, beliefs that have been institutionalized within ourselves. I believe this is an ongoing process. I feel as though it won't be achieved in one day. There will be hurdles. It will be difficult. But I feel like we need to start with ourselves, only then so that it stops with us and we don't carry these toxic traits into the next generation. The second is to dismantle, is action on the ground, to dismantle the systems of oppression around us. We can no longer be complacent. We need to be at the front lines demanding change. We need to be questioning our leaders. We need to be educating friends and family. We need to be calling out injustice at every level. We need to be involved in policy. We need to be on the ground. And most importantly, we need to put an end to stereotypes, because I believe that stereotypes manifests into ideas and then to a belief, and then yes, and then it becomes something that's uncontrollable.
Right.
Lastly, I think 2 seconds. Just community organizing. I feel that's very, very important, and we need to start at a grassroots level. And then lastly, it's young people are at the center of this movement and at the revolution, and we need to take our rightful place.
Thank you so much. That's what a powerful way to end it off, and an empowering way, you know, just to say to the youth, it is in your hands, it is possible. We are the future of, you know, this country. We are the majority in terms of population statistics, and it is in our hands. So I'd like to thank each and every one of you. Daphne, Ronapio, Daniel Erasmus, Jamie Lee Thomas, Fatima Leha, you are champions, you are youth leaders. I'm so blessed to have met you today. Thank you so much for this impactful conversation, and wish you all the best in your future endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. So as we make way for the next session, I'd just like to ask our next panelists, as well as Neo Mosala, to please turn on your videos, so that, or rather your video there, so we can see your faces at this time, and then we'll then start commencing with our next you know, topic. I'm just going to be looking while I'm talking through you know, my Zoom here, if I can see your faces. Okay, I see Tando, I see Ndabentle. I also, let me just check here who else I see. I'm just waiting to ensure that everyone is here. I think I also see you too, Nero, joining us right here. So if you're also a participant and you've been carving out questions, please continue to stay with us, because I think in this you know, next session we'll also be touching on, you know, entrepreneurship. We spoke about it just to scratch the surface with our previous leaders, youth leaders, but when I talk about it more extensively, you know, technology, innovation, the gig economy, social activism, and what our next batch of leaders are doing to ensure that we play an active role. So, Hopper, model, lawyer, activist, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Tando. Obakeng, Lisanyani, you're a social entrepreneur. It's good to have you, Obakeng.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us. And Junior Ngulube, you're the co-founder of Pineapple. Such a pleasure. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to take part in this.
Absolutely. Neo Mosala, you're the chairperson of Rethinking Economics for Africa at the University of Wits. You are the holder of the pockets. So when we talk about economics and money and, you know, where we're going, we are hoping that you will tell us there is, of course, hope. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be on.
We're so happy to have you as well, Newo. I want to start with you, Thando. And you know, I just want to continue to encourage our virtual guests to please listen in, keep those conversations going in the Q&A and chat, and those questions coming in as we learn from our leaders. But Thando, I want to start with you. And I mean, you are sure, you have broken barriers. You're one of the youth that have really broken barriers in as far as diversity and inclusivity is concerned. How important was it for you to open that door? I mean, even when you entered the modeling agency or the industry as a person with albinism, were you conscious of the fact that you were sort of shaking old, you know, traditions and norms and rather opening that door to diversity and inclusivity?
So I would say that I was conscious. The thing about albinism, like many other identity groups that are underrepresented, is that due to its underrepresentation, it suffered from stereotypes, misrepresentation, and just all sorts of harmful representation. So when I went into it, I was trying to negotiate a different kind of representation, but also, most importantly, I wanted to show albinism as part of human diversity, to basically destigmatize difference. And I realized that culture was a potent negotiating platform, because I had always said that, you know, when I was a lawyer, I was in the business of representation. And as a model, I was in the business of representation. But it was one of, culture became that negotiating medium where you could change narratives and kind of broaden narratives in a way where when people see people as part of culture, then it starts manifesting as a consequence just in their everyday lives. So yeah.
When you speak about some of the stereotypes, you say to me that there wasn't enough education around different, you know, groups of people, enough awareness, and therefore you were that, or at least you were part of, you know, the education and the awareness, or at least the awareness campaigns, so to demystify some of those stereotypes associated with persons with albinism. So again, then it leads me to the next question to you. How important then is it for education to play a role when dealing with social justice, discrimination, demystifying some of the myths that, you know, sort of society associates with?
Yeah, for sure. So firstly, I think you need to be quite clear on the purpose of education. When you like sit back and then you ask yourself questions like, why do we educate people? Why like is it important for someone to spend 12 years in a high school and then 4 years in university? And often if you can't answer those questions in a way of what type of society you're building, I think there's something that missing there that I would, for me, ideally, I think of the purpose of education in like two folds. First one is around envisioning society, envisioning coexistence. And then the other part of it is more around the culture that you want to instill in people. You like ask yourself, what type of citizens do you want to have? Yes, they can be brilliant. Yes, they can be educated from the finest institutions, but if they're not active in governing the country that they live in, if they're not active in questioning and holding power to account, then I think what you will then find is that often in a lot of education systems, what is missing really at the core of it is the purpose of why we educate. And I think clarity on that means that then when you sit back after 12 years, you can measure up against, if you had said your purpose is to have a much more diverse society, how have we achieved that through the ways that we have taught people? And often because I think we are not so clear on why we educate, at the end of it, we just reference very, very frivolous things like the pass rate of the matrics, of example, last year, the Minister of the Basic Education said that pass rate improved by 3%, which is great. But what she also missed out on is that that number was then understood out of context, in the sense that 12 years ago, you had 1.2 million students start grade 1. 12 years later, you have less than even 400,000 of them passing to the point where they can even go to university. So what has happened in that chain, if then we're going to say that we're going to measure the purpose of our education by how many students we can send to university? And I would say on that front, we are failing. And a much more important way to at least think of education as a way of building society is looking at it from a cultural side of what type of people are going to get out of the system. And secondly, what type of contributions are they going to make to society?
Absolutely. Now, education also, I suppose, goes, hand in hand with skills development, coming up with innovation, with ideas, because when you educate yourself, you expose yourself to not only a problem, but to also opportunities and your skill and how your skill can, of course, mediate those, problems. So I need to come to you then, Ndabente, because you're the co-founder of Pineapple. Earlier on, President Cyril Ramaphosa appealed to the youth to be more innovative and, come up or rather be part of the solution towards the economic recovery plan post-COVID-19, which is, a global pandemic that we're all going through right now. So then how does your company, Pineapple, that is, address a socio-economic issue in South Africa?
Awesome. Thank you, Dumelo. Just to give a bit of context as to what we do at Pineapple, we are a digital-first insurance provider that allows people to insure their belongings and their vehicles merely by snapping a picture of those items using our app, and then we use artificial intelligence to pretty much guide you through the rest of the process. Now, one of the biggest failings of the traditional insurance industry is that they have made it extremely difficult for people to actually access their products. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but the two main reasons are a lack of product market fit, and B, trying to push overly complex products to the market. And starting off with the first reason, the lack of product market fit. When it comes to people wanting to insure their belongings, currently traditional insurance companies make it extremely difficult for you to obtain insurance on an item by item basis, right? So, if I'm somebody who lives in a shared housing unit, or if I live in a shack, and I want to insure something such as my bed or a piece of furniture, the only options that I currently have are what are known as, household contents products, or blanket products that are offered by these insurance companies. And these don't make sense for me because these are products that are tailored for people who might live in townhouses or standalone houses. But when it comes to item by item insurance, nobody is really offering that service. And therefore it makes it hard for people to actually, protect those one or two or three very valuable items that they have. And that's why you see that when things such as shack fires happen, they can completely obliterate somebody's livelihood because people didn't have access to insure those items to start off with. And this brings me to the second reason why insurance has been so hard to access for the majority of South Africans, is because of the overly complex products. When somebody looks at the traditional policy wordings that these traditional insurance companies put forward, they lace them with such big and large jargon that makes it extremely hard for you to understand. In fact, it actually scares you away to the point where you don't want to insure with them. But at Pineapple, we have combated these issues by allowing people to easily onboard item by item just by snapping a picture of that item. So much so that we find that people have gotten to the level of insuring small items such as a stool or a bed at very competitive prices, as low as R7 a month, just to insure these necessities. So that should you find yourself in a situation where you lose everything, you can put in a claim and be put back in a stable situation. So I'd say that's what we're doing as Pineapple to alleviate.
So you are addressing a socio-economic need right now in South Africa, and quite frankly, even when you make the example with the shack fires, I mean, this has been a historical issue in South Africa. How many times have you heard about shack fires in our townships, but also affecting other households, and unfortunately having households not being able to do anything about it because there wasn't that option to get some relief from it. So then it brings me to the next question, Neo, to you. I mean, in the work that you do, and obviously the research that you do at Rethinking Economics for Africa, are we seeing more young people exploring sort of, alternative means of work within the gig economy or even the digital economy?
Yeah, well, of course, I think at the moment what's happening in South Africa is that things that are quite old, for example, the idea of the gig economy and like non-contractual work are becoming more modernized and digitalized. So something like what's happening in the South African economy for the past 10 years is that take on people for like long-term contractual work. So we've seen that flexible work is something that's already existing in a lot of sectors. Like the people that you, for example, see sitting on a street corner waiting for someone to pick them up so they can go do, for example, building or repair work. Those are non-contractual workers, right? So they work on a gig basis, on a non-contractual basis. And then you have new things like Uber being introduced into the market where young people can work on a non-contractual, really flexible basis if they have access to assets like cars. And now what's going to be happening is you're going to be seeing, due to the high graduate unemployment and a lot of like people who do have skills but can't be employed long-term because of how the markets are set up right now and the very low absorption rate in a lot of fields, you're going to have those people who are engineers or they offer financial services, they're accountants. You're going to be having those people not work at one company with a long-term contract, but working in the gig economy where you offer your services doing sales to one company and then they pay you, and then you offer your services doing something else, perhaps consulting with another company, and you get paid for that. And the thing about the gig economy is it can be very beneficial as long as the work that it's providing is like quality work. We don't really want young people to only be doing very like exploitative work, because that's the danger of the gig economy and non-contractual work. You're seeing it in countries like the US where people take on these gig jobs and they don't get paid as much. So that's the problematic aspect. But in terms of time and in terms of skills that it offers young professionals, it's very, very beneficial. So you'll be seeing a lot of people going into the gig economy as time goes on, especially after this crisis, which is going to lead to a lot of retrenchments of people that are otherwise very qualified, but companies just can't afford to keep them on long term anymore.
Yeah. Now, as you're speaking about these opportunities that they are presented in the gig economy and digital economy, as well as, the challenges thereof, I keep thinking about that call from the president that he made that, young people have to come up with innovative ideas, especially in this time that we're in of, COVID-19, and support needs to be given to them. However, Thando, coming to you, I can't help but think that it's quite, a very difficult time to be innovative while you are still fighting other social injustices, particularly against women. And I'm sure that as a social activist yourself, that here we are trying to secure our future through academia, trying to secure our future through employment, and then we're seeing this unemployment stats just absolutely horrendous at this time. But at the same time, we're trying to stay alive as women. We're trying to stay alive and ensure that our daughters, our sisters, our mothers, our friends, our peers who are female are alive. So I want to ask you, what is then the role of the youth, in gender-based violence activism? And what call to action are you making then to, those who hold the responsibility to protect the vulnerable? These are the very same people that are saying, come up with innovative ideas, but equally their responsibility is to protect the vulnerable, as well as to prosecute perpetrators.
So this is quite an interesting question for me. And, I'm going to answer it with as much humility as I can, because I don't have the answers to this question, but I can just provide a particular perspective. Now, for me, for instance, as soon as the sun goes down as a woman, the first thing I worry about is the gender stratification, because I feel like my gender is vulnerable. But in certain, if I move, let's say, to KZN, the issue I experienced then in terms of violence is that I have albinism. And so that's an interesting intersection when it comes to violence. Now, I think, first of all, somebody who said to me, the definition of privilege is no consequence management. And I thought about that. quite a lot, because I think one of the issues that you have right now with the justice system is people want accountability and they want consistency. They need to know that, you know, whenever a crime is committed against them, they can see, they can trust the police, but also they need to feel like police stations, prosecutors are safe spaces for them. They're safe spaces to land, because a great deal of the time, and that goes again into the consistency, a great deal of the time people feel like, depending on which body they're in, it'll tell you what kind of treatment they'll get at the police station. So whether it's socioeconomic circumstances, whether it's even albinism, there are people who, you know, for instance, if they've been sexually assaulted and they've got albinism, they're afraid that they will receive prejudice as opposed to service. So you're having all of these particular issues. So accountability and also safe spaces, but most importantly, and this is what I've realized, because moving into activism, even though I went into it through the cultural space, is that, you know, when you're, you know, looking into forming policies and helping the UN, you realize that data collection becomes a problem. Data is important, and intersectional data is important. So for instance, you'll say a crime was committed against a person with a disability. Disabilities have a wide range. Albinism in itself is defined as a disability according to the UN Convention. Then if you don't have the data, how do you even begin to have response measures and specific measures to a crisis? So 3 things: safe spaces to land, accountability, and data collection.
With that being said, then, highlighting quite important gaps there, Thando, data collection as being one of them, it makes me wonder that aren't there some lessons for our leaders, our government, to derive, you know, from this reality? And perhaps, Obake, you can help us with this next question, you know, as to say then, what are some of the lessons that you feel that government and our leaders need to be aware of, that they need to derive when it comes to, you know, social activism? I mean, we're seeing this activism even now with the hashtag Black Lives Matter, hashtag Am I Next, you know, femicide, gender-based violence, equally with some of the issues that we're seeing in education and quality education, access to education, and over and above that in this bubble of COVID-19. What do you think are those sort of lessons that you feel they need to take note of right now and correct if they can, but also learn from and almost future-proof so that we can deal with them and the future doesn't have to look as it is now?
Yeah, so if I may just come in on the last point that Thando touched on, which is around data, because I think data is quite important. I remember when they were asking the Minister of Basic Education if she knows how many schools are COVID ready, and she could not pull out that data because, to be fair, there is no ways that she can know from like the top of her finger, because there is no tool that is being leveraged to know what the situation is across provinces. That typically how like the monitoring and the data collection is done is like in physical terms. So there's a need for a digital data system, essentially, that can be overlapped with a bunch of intersectionalities that Thando has also mentioned on, which like also then brings me to another part of the idea of you have all these different departments of government. And often the question that I ask myself when they each come up with their own initiatives and agendas is how well integrated they are with like each other. Example is I just kind of sit back. I'm like, basic education cannot solve for some of its problems without considering social development. And by that, I mean, there are certain basic conditions needed for someone to just learn. And then you now think about telecommunications, who then, if someone says, it's great, we want to deploy a bunch of ICT devices and access to the internet in a bunch of rural and like remote areas. The question then becomes, data in South Africa is quite expensive. How sustainable is that measure? But then even second to that, back to that social conditions needed for learning, is that if I don't have food on my table and you just gave me a tablet, chances are I'm just going to sell it because it does not speak to the immediate needs that I have at this point in time. So I think there is room for government to think about what type of digital systems they can leverage that can allow them to be able to check the pulse on the ground as fast as possible. Because I think, yes, it's great, protests, I hear them, but very little action actually emerges from that. And just on this whole point of digital tracking systems is that if government comes to us as citizens, they're like, we have 500 billion that we're going to put towards the COVID relief fund. We need to be able to track how those funds are spent, where they're channeled, and back again on that point of data and digital systems being quite important. But then lastly, the idea that for you to be able to have a much more holistic approach to how you solve people's problems, understanding their context, you need to have all the different departments of a government speaking to one another in a very well integrated way, which currently we don't have. And then lastly, I think people are tired of words. People are tired of talk shops. People are tired of a bunch of media presses. People just want to see action, really. And if you can come back to people and say, last week we had a problem in a certain area, which Panyaza Lesotho actually does quite well. Whenever people say we have a problem where a school has been broken into, is that there's a part where he actually acknowledges that that the problem is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I have decided that we will do 6, 7, 8, and the outcome of what we have done has been has been 4, 5, 10. That I'm like, if you can't offer people that level of transparency in how you act as a government, their faith in your leadership will just not stand, because it will just be every single time you just hear you with a bunch of these talk shops and nothing gets done.
When faith, or rather when leadership is questionable and when leadership is compromised, unfortunately, it's the citizens, it's the people on the ground that gave the short end of the stick. Because what I'm getting from you, Thando and Obakeng, is that if there isn't data, thorough data, as you've mentioned, Obakeng, with the example of the deputy basic, the minister of deputy Minister of Basic Education couldn't give a certain number. If there isn't enough data, it means there isn't representation. And if the UN then cannot have the right data, there isn't representation. And when there isn't representation, it means that there isn't fair and equal representation. So there are cracks when it comes to counting. When they say, raise your hand so you can count, then there's a gap there in making sure that everyone is represented and everyone therefore matters and counts. But speaking of that, in Ndabendle, I want to come to you just in your space of then entrepreneurship. I mean, you are regarded as part of the new wave of youth leadership and innovation and entrepreneurship. I think even your track record and how far you've come, having to go through different obstacle courses to get to where you are, just shows the journey that one needs to walk to count and to matter and to be fairly and equally represented. But with that being said, do you think there is enough youth representation when it comes to business and corporate SA?
Not at all. I think what corporate SA has done really well is paint the illusion that there's youth representation. But if you actually start to peel away at the layers and you start to look at the more executive managements and the top level managements, there's really no youth representation in terms of making those key strategic decisions. And you're starting to see the effects of that today. More and more of the youth are starting to go their own way. More and more of the youth their own way in terms of entrepreneurship, and more and more of the youth are really starting to feel disenfranchised with going down the traditional employment routes by working at a corporate and starting from the ground and working your way up. And it's such a pity, because these corporates don't see the long-term effects that this is going to have on their business, on the ability to stay nimble and agile. Because at the end of the day, you need youth representation in order to, fuel that machine with new and innovative ideas. If you don't have the representation there, you'll tend to keep recreating the wheel. And if you actually pay attention to a lot of the strategies of a lot of these big corporate companies, a lot of them aren't innovating anymore. For them, the source of innovation comes through acquisition, and who's starting those companies that they're acquiring? It's mostly young people. And it ties back to that whole, notion of an economy sort of having an aging population, such as, let's say, Japan. People always say Japan has an aging population, but not a lot of people actually notice that this phenomenon happens in corporates as well, where the average age in these corporates can be very top heavy, and this leads to serious implications in the future. It's a pity that these corporates don't feel that today, because if they did, they'll probably start doing something about it. But what you're going to find in the next 5, 10, 15 years is that the lack of innovation, because of not investing so much in the youth, will start to cripple them, and eventually they'll topple over.
It's interesting that you mentioned that and talk about corporates that aren't innovating in this day and age, because this week alone, Dr. Andi Lengaba, who is the founding partner and chairman of Convergence Partners and the commissioner on the Presidential Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution, had made a call for ICASA to close. This he cites that we need to create a digital regulator. And unfortunately, ICASA at this time cannot regulate, digitally, and we need that. But he was speaking more into innovation, that we're moving into innovation now, and we need to have innovative corporations as well. But with that being said, I want to come to you, Neo, and just to our virtual guests watching and writing down those questions that I'm seeing. Continue doing so, because after Neo's answer to my next question, we'll then be taking some of your questions. I see some questions already coming up for Tando, for Obakeng, Gabent, as well as you, Neo, and we'll be, of course, touching on those questions. So please do keep them coming, and after this next answer from Neo, we'll get into a Q&A. But with that being said, Neo, I mean, in his budget speech, this week, Finance Minister, that is Dido Mboweni, said that it will cost South Africa a couple of more years before we actually, return to where our economy was pre-COVID-19. And, our economy wasn't necessarily in the best of, places at the time. It was already an ailing economy. Hence, we've been seeing some of those efforts from President Cyril Ramaphosa with the investment summit, with the job summit, trying to get commitment from various investors to invest in South Africa. But with that being said, then what practical role can the youth play as part of South Africa's economic recovery plan, do you think?
Well, I think there are two things that we need to consider. The one is entrepreneurship, which is spoken about a lot. But in order for that to become something that the youth have access to, it needs to be a viable option. So young people need to know that when they start businesses, they're able to get market access, for example. When they start businesses, they're not going to be kept out of supply chains. So that's a very, very big part that we get to play. And I think Daventle said something very important when he spoke about how we have sort of like a very aging population within the private sector. We also have a really aging population in terms of business owners and who owns businesses and whose businesses survive, because there's a perception that young people don't start businesses, and it's quite ridiculous, because the idea that people who are young, who have all of this energy, would be sitting at home with qualifications, not attempting to start businesses, it's counterintuitive, and frankly, it's wrong. But the problem is young people's businesses don't survive. So the role that we have to play when we start it sort of gets interrupted halfway, and there's this arrested development. So the first thing is entrepreneurship. We need to, from the president's end, as he says, we need to be able to be given the capacity for our ideas and for our businesses to thrive. You can get that NYDA funding. You can start your businesses, and this happens to a lot of businesses. They get access from the Department of Small Businesses or the NYDA, or they'll get from the SME fund, they'll get funding from that. And once they start their businesses, they realize, it's quite hard to penetrate the market, whether you're selling directly to consumers or you're someone who needs to integrate within these big supply chains. It's a monopolist game. So when the president says, hey, young people, you need to be innovative, you need to start businesses, there also needs to be that access and that space for us in the economy. The second part is obviously for people who aren't necessarily entrepreneurs, but they're working and they're skilled and they've been equipped to do certain things. That's another role that we can play. I think we underestimate how important it is within our work culture to have young people there, within the state, within the private sector. We need young people for economic recovery, because if you're looking for productivity, if you're looking for ideas, if you're looking for innovation, if you're looking for the kind of people that can not only start new businesses, but give a new lease and give a new life to existing businesses, whether small, medium enterprises or really large corporations. You need young people to be in there, and you don't just need them to be, you know, on like entry-level jobs. Young people need to be in very influential positions in the state, outside the state, in the public sector and the private sector. So that's one other role that we have that's really, really important. And I think coming out of COVID, pushing forward. I mean, so my background is in economics. I'm also a law student, but what you find is that when young people have ideas, there's a dismissal towards our ideas, right? So things like universal basic income, right? The idea that when you want people to be able to start businesses that thrive, you can't do it in an economy where spending is low. People need to be able to spend money so these businesses can get money. So something like UBI, where we say following a crisis, you need to put money into consumers' hands. And if those people don't have jobs, the state literally needs to give them the money. Something like the COVID grant isn't just a useless, futile exercise of giving people free money. When the state spends in that way, instead of spending through these, you know, sort of like very bulky initiatives of saying, well, we're going to create jobs ourselves. When it spends to saying we're going to give consumers money, or we're going to give businesses money, and those businesses and those consumers spend, that's where these small businesses are going to get their money from. When you're talking about township economies and township economies needing to thrive, people in townships need to have money to patron those businesses. So I think when we speak about young people being integral in the economy, it needs to be on all levels, and it needs to be in the private sector and the public sector. So we have a really large role to play, and I'm quite excited that the president made that a very big part of his Youth Day speech, talking about the economics, because I think oftentimes young people, because we tend to be quite idealistic, we're very ideological people, where we're addressed with ideology and rhetoric most times, and that's not good enough anymore, because our problems as young people in South Africa are very economic in nature. Even when you talk about the groups that are marginalized in South Africa, it always, well, not always, there's culture, there's tradition, but the economy is a very fundamental part of how people like women, people like Black people, people like people with disabilities are oppressed in South Africa. Because when you go and look at demographics like people with disabilities, those are the people that can't get work in South Africa. People that are very capable of doing those jobs, they don't get work, because in this already very limited labor market, the people that are selected tend to be the people with privilege. It's not who has the most education, it's not who has the most skills, it's the people with privilege. So you get this reinforcing effect where the social hierarchy informs what the economy is going to look like, and then whoever benefits from the economy gets money to dominate within society.
Right.
So
and as you're talking and making that example of, you know, people living with disability, remind me of what Tando had said earlier about it's almost as if, you know, your body, the body that you're in, there's already a sense of response which is almost mentally automatic in how one responds to you, right? The assumption is then, therefore, because you are a person living with disability, then they assume that you're not capable of, you know, acquiring the necessary skill to provide that specific skill set, which has to be dismantled. But also, what I'm getting from you now is that support needs to be given. Yes, there could be innovative ideas, but if Untitled didn't receive support, then we're not sure where Pineapple would be at this time. So there needs to be, barriers of entry which are relaxed, red tape which is relaxed, so that young people can receive the necessary support. And you bring me to mind some of the young people who we've seen in Africa and in South Africa who've been given that support and, you know, that opportunity to be in positions of power. When I look at Emma Theophilus, she's 23, and this year she was appointed, you know, Namibia's Information, Communication and Technology Technology Deputy Minister. When we go to Mali, in 2018, Kamisa Kamara, who's 35, was appointed as a new foreign minister in the country. When we look at Zimbabwe, Kirsty Coventry, who's 34, was appointed as Zimbabwe's sports minister. We look at Buholo Joyke Newendo, 30, appointed Botswana's Minister for Investment, Trade and Industry. Come to SA, Yonompendulo Mkhatshwa, Yonaledi Chirwas, Boyani Pambos, Minister Ronald Lamolas are those young people who have been given that opportunity to take space and to, have their ideas listened to. So with that being said, then I'd like to just then open up, the floor to some of our, virtual attendees and guests who've been sending questions. And I want to give them an opportunity now. And I see questions piling up. So I'll start with the question from Gugule to Jack. This question is directed to you, Tando. And the question says, Gugule is so affectionate. She says, Sis Tando. If anyone calls me Sis Tumelo, I'm already giving out Tom's chocolates because I'm just like, oh. So Gugule says, Sis Tando, do you think that we can change stigma or the stigmas that have been created by African cultures? And if yes, how do you think we can do so?
Okay. Before I get to her question, though, I'd love to say something towards what Neo had said, because it made me think of something that's a bit out of my space, but I was looking for something with regards to African material, and I found a very interesting African material, which was called, it's in Burkina Faso, and it's called Fani Dan Faso. And what happened with that particular material is the cotton was planted in Burkina Faso, it was manufactured in Burkina Faso, sold in Burkina Faso. But what happened when the then president, late president now, Thomas Sankara, he created a market for that because he made it law for the employees of Burkina Faso to wear this particular material. So you had different industries emerge just from this particular material, whether it's planting the cotton, etc. So it wasn't just, entrepreneurship, but government with political will created markets for the people who were actually creating this Burki material. So anyway, I just thought I'd just add on to what she was saying. But in terms of changing stigma in Africa, this is the thing. I think one of the things I've had to try and combat is allowing people to see things in a way where, how do I explain this? Now, albinism, for instance, according to the UN Convention against it experiences racial discrimination based on color, even though albinism in itself is not a race. So albinism, despite race, experiences discrimination based on color. So a very good example of that is that the Xhosa word for albinism is ngao. And people don't get to see the contradiction or the magnitude until you say, when you went up in arms during H&M, why did you go up in arms? It is because Black people, it reminded you of a particular history when Black people were dehumanized and likened to monkeys, and it becomes the same pattern. So one thing that I try to use is, first of all, give people references that are similar in their world so that they understand the magnitude of dehumanization. The second thing is exposure. A great deal of the time, stigma thrives because exposure is quite limited. And that's the reason why culture became such an important negotiating space, because you needed to also see people outside of the narratives that you are used to. You needed to see them in different narratives. So whether you see a person with whatever, and I actually don't like the term disability, but it's the formal term. I prefer differently abled. But when you see a person who's otherly abled and you see them as a CEO, you see them as, a scientist, see them in different facets of society and different forms of storytelling, then it destigmatizes the singular narrative that you use to apply to them or to dismiss them. So I do think that with enough cultural negotiation, it will serve as awareness, but also a transformative tool.
Thank you so much, Tando, for that. You gave so much context there as well. Obakeng, there's a question for you here as well. The question says, what do you think can be done in order to close the gap between the quality of education that is given in private as well as in public schools, do you think?
Yeah, so firstly, I think it's important to note that about 6% of the national budget every single year is spent towards education, and that amounts to about 260 billion. That amounts to about 260 billion rand, which is quite a lot compared to other SADC or like any other, mostly like African countries. But when we compare outcomes, we are like far behind. And I think, firstly, we sit back and we say we have to invest in teacher training, firstly, quite a lot, in the sense that you have teachers who find themselves in very, very different in very, very different situations. Some are teachers of multi-grade schools, others are teachers of very, very rural schools. So when you come with a bunch of ideas around leveraging technology to be able to teach, there's a part where you have to take into account that their pedagogy has just been limited to I stand in front of the classroom and I just conduct from there. Whereas if you have to consider any other form of teaching outside of outside of a classroom, you're really going to have to think about how do you prepare teachers to be able to still assess comprehension, to still be able to test and see the like mood of the classroom in a way that I think people have particularly struggled with even under COVID. And UNISA actually responded quite quickly to that, and thing in the sense that they developed a course that is really about how do you teach teachers how to teach in the digital world, which like sounds, I mean, often like you might just sit back and just think that it's like enough to just try to want to replicate like a physical classroom in a digital world via like a Zoom or like anything of that nature. But the thinking has to completely evolve to be able to accommodate for the purpose of ensuring that good quality learning happens. But then secondly, I think in South Africa, you have quintile 1 to quintile 5 schools. And traditionally your quintile 4 and 5 are the ones that are much more economically advanced. Parents can be able to step up in times of COVID and not have to wait for the government to give them masks or to install certain measures in place. But often the biggest problem, even like from like a learning outcomes perspective, lies between quintile 1 and between quintile 1 and 3. So it is great that within that quintile, we have been able to increase amount of access and amount of enrollment rather than access actually. But what we struggle with is being able to retain those students that have been enrolled into the system, because yet again, the basic conditions needed for learning are just not there. If someone doesn't have food to eat, if someone lives in an area where mom is unemployed, dad is unemployed, or like sometimes even dad is not even there, then there is a space where you are asking them to just stop being a child and step up to be able to provide, because that is the most immediate need. So I sit back, I'm like, there's a bunch of recommendations made to DBE year in, year out. They know what is not working. And from like a systems planning perspective, you have essentially for the past 25 years, the budget on education keeps on improving, but we are not seeing directly where that money is going and what is the intention of directing such a big amount of government spending towards that. So there's a bunch of money funneled through that just really never gets to the ground, from basic things such as provision of like textbooks and so forth. So essentially, I think the idea of matching up to private schools is not one that is quite realistic. I think that we have to step back and say, how do we cater for the different contexts in which our students find themselves in? And if you cannot cater for a student in quintile 1 to the same that you would, essentially, I don't think you can cater for those types of students similarly, because you like find that backgrounds are very different, locations are very different, access to the internet, access to devices are essentially very different. So I think the best way for us to ensure that the gap reduces is looking at the different schools that we have within those quintiles and being able to provide a solution that takes into account the basic social conditions needed for learning in that type of I mean, in that particular quintile school, because otherwise we're
Right.
just trying to solve a very nuanced problem with just a single solution, and we can all see that it clearly doesn't work.
Thanks, Obakeng, for that. And Nabenke, there's also a question for you here from Anonymous. They ask, whether they say first that you've been involved in the start of an insurance company. You've experienced what the environment is like in that startup mode. Anonymous asks, I would like to know your experience when it came to raising capital and what challenges you faced. And also, I would like to know any key advice that you have for a person in the startup environment.
Okay, I'll start with the second part of that question. The key advice that I would give is that you should always fall in love with the problem and not the solution. You find that when it comes to solutions, what might work today might not work tomorrow, but problems tend to stay consistent, right? So when you find yourself falling in love with the problem, you're always forcing yourself to look at it from different angles and always questioning yourself and testing the solution that you have now, and seeing if it's future-proof and if there's any holes in it. I'll definitely say that's one of the best pieces of advice that I've been given. The next piece of advice I'd give is that as an entrepreneur, when you start off on the journey, you should let go of the idea of perfection before going to market. I think when something is your baby and you've seen it from the idea phase up until inception, you tend to want to make sure that it's super perfect, that all your I's are dotted and that all your T's are crossed before you go to market. But if you start to go down that rabbit hole, you'll tend to keep working and iterating on the product, and eventually you'll never launch. What you actually want to do is get it just to a point where the idea or the solution can fulfill its purpose, and you roll it out to market, and as quickly as you can get feedback from your customers, and then you start to iterate on top of that and improve, and eventually you end up with a more robust idea. And this ties into the first part of the question, which is raising capital. A lot of people see raising capital as a means to take an idea and bring that to life, but really what capital is taking something that already demonstrates potential and giving it legs. So what you need to do is get to that point where you're out in markets and you're demonstrating that there is some sort of business value to this idea. And then from there, you're able to raise the capital for that. And when it comes to raising capital, what you want to do is you want to demonstrate as best as you can that you actually are providing and creating business value with this idea. So you want to make sure that you're collecting as much performance metrics of your idea in terms of either sales, your cost of sales, your retentions, your conversions, and all that data. And you want to make sure that you're keeping meticulous track of this and presenting it to your investors. And that gives investors the confidence to actually back this idea and give it the legs that it needs to grow from a baby to a fully fledged human. So I'd say that's the advice that I'd give.
Thank you so much, Ndabenhle, for that. And I'm sure for a lot of young people right now who are in startup, mode, could use that practical advice. Noah, there's a question for you here from Kaya Nokanda. And their question to you is, if you were the president of the country, darling, the first female president of the country, perhaps, if I could just add that. But if you were the president of the country, barring introducing a UBI, how would you then go about enlarging the tech space?
There's like no good question that ever starts with if you were the president of the country. It's always the most difficult one. So in terms of the tech space, I think South Africa's approach to tech needs to be very specific. Like if you look at case studies of countries like India, they didn't just try and holistically say, we want to compete in the tech space against the US, or we want to compete against China. They sort of like skill their population towards something very specific, which is sort of like that IT, that communication aspect of tech, and the type of, for example, engineers that they tried to produce for the tech space were very, very specific. So communications and IT, that's what they were trying to build. And I think if I wanted to expand our tech space in South Africa, I would first of all look at where our skills are geared towards right now. So, for example, if we are an economy that was traditionally in manufacturing, certain skills come with that, right? There's a skill set that comes from that, and you want to build on that skill set. You don't want to try and reinvent the wheel. So what I would do is I would first of all focus on skills and equipping our labor force from university level, from Tibet level, from people that are in the market right now and working, and have those people sort of like have the type of skills that you need. The tech space right now is very, it's booming in the services industry, so digital services are quite big right now. I think that's the space where South Africa can really, really enter do quite well. So things like IT, people imagine it as you are going to be starting an IT consulting company by yourself and doing that from the ground up, but a lot of jobs in IT are based on services. So people being employed by a company to offer services, people working by themselves and having skills and deciding I'm going to start a company and I'm going to offer my services. And those are the type of things that the NYDA and all of these funding projects, the president's youth employment initiatives, that's what we need to be focusing on for the tech space. And that's where business funding especially needs to be geared towards, because there are a lot of people, especially in the startup market, who have all of these great ideas. But the problem with South Africa is that we want to see things work before we take a chance on them, and government is also doing that now. And I understand private investors, you know, they're very speculative, they're very conservative and prudent with who they invest in. But if anyone is going to take a shot on that oddball entrepreneur who has this brilliant idea, but you know it needs funding and they don't really have anything to back them up in terms of like infrastructure, if anyone's going to take a bet on that person who's the person with the idea and shows that the idea can work, it needs to be government. That's what I'd focus on if I was the president. Right. And I wanted to expand our digital economy.
All right, and I'm glad you said if I was the president, not when I become president. That question can be quite problematic. That disclaimer needs to be put out there. Thank you so much, Neo, for that. And unfortunately, due to time, I would have loved to take more questions because, you know, our Q&A tab there is just booming with more questions. But due to time, I have to now move on to closing remarks and then welcome back Dr. Precious Moloi-Motsepe to give us, you know, her closing remark as, you know, of course, our leader when it comes to issues such as this. So Thando, I want to come back to you and just in your closing remarks and perhaps just also encourage our panelists that let's not leave this conversation still in a problematic stage. Let's ensure that it's solution driven and we leave hope towards young people, so that when we're done with this webinar, we're going back to our reality and our lives, I can pick up this baton and move forward with the information you've equipped me with. So Thando, just starting with you then, how do you then think, in your closing remarks, can young people who are at, you know, the front lines of transformative social justice campaign and activism be better supported?
You know, I think one thing you always need to remember as an activist is that you're really brilliant when you have to do a needs analysis. Now, the example I can give you is Simon Goli, and happy Pride Month to everybody. Simon Goli, who actually, who was credited with the term sexual orientation in the Constitution. He was a gay rights activist and as well as an AIDS activist. And what he did is he ensured that that term, which I feel was very human inspired because he could have had a different term to ensure that there's no discrimination. He could have had maybe homosexuality, for instance. But because he had gone through and surveyed so much in his experience, he created the term sexual orientation to be inserted in the Constitution. And that term was a weapon for many, it really destabilized oppressive legislation, whether it came to, same-sex couples being allowed to adopt, whether it was, couples who are allowed to marry in same-sex marriages, etc. But that term was quite potent. So it is because an activist partnered with an institution. And you have something actually in the United States. I don't know anything that we have similar here. They have the Makers Conference, and what the Makers Conference does is that the investment that they make, so all companies, whether it's Apple, Yahoo, whatever, they pledge, but they don't pledge money. They pledge performance. So what they pledge is what resources will they give to what initiatives. They pledge transformation within their own companies. And the following year, they come back to say, all right, fine, if we want 3% Black women in our executive next year, the following year, you have to come back and you have to report. But also, that's why I'm saying also, you know, the last thing in terms of activists is something I actually quite noticed recently, is that corporates are beginning to ask activists to come in and give them a needs analysis. So when it comes to diversity and inclusion, activists are one of those people who actually have a framework, an analytical framework on what is needed. So whatever it is, whatever activism that you're doing, you know, I think that as long as people see activism not as an antagonistic platform, but as a cooperative platform with institutions, if you can marry those two, then we can really just have a very powerful and progressive South Africa. So yeah, that's what I got to say.
Absolutely. And actually, Tando, we're seeing, you know, activism shake corporates and corporations out of their comfort zone. If you look at the Black Lives Matter, we're seeing more people calling out and say, actually, so-and-so company, what is your stand on Black Lives Matter? So-and-so company, what is your perspective? Don't be conservative. Don't say, oh, no, we just do business. No. If your business is benefiting from Black bodies, you better have a perspective and a standpoint. So we're seeing that marrying that you're talking about. And again, just coming to you in your closing remarks, Kate, I mean, how can we bring hope to young South Africans who are anxious about, you know, the academic and employment future prospects due to COVID-19 and the discouraging unemployment statistics? I ask this because there was a survey done recently where young people are quite anxious about their future. And actually, even with the first session that we had, you know, one of the panelists also expressed their fear about, will I have a job? Will I eventually graduate? Is my future secured? What do I do now, especially during this pandemic? So what is then your message of hope, but also what do you think we can do to just sort of ensure that those anxieties are alleviated?
Yeah, so I would just say, firstly, I think it's important to reframe the way that often people look at young people looking for work. It's like often like, oh, you're not looking hard enough, you're not asking the like right people, so forth. That I'm like, often it's highly unlikely that as a young person, straight out of university or straight out of high school, that you're gonna have the type of social capital often required to be able to navigate recruitment for work. Because we all know that roundabout only 30% of jobs actually ever get advertised globally. And I would even argue that in like a country like ours, that number is slightly less. So I think often what can be done and what should be done has to lie on the employer's initiative, really. Is that if someone ends up applying for like a job, at least bare minimum, just like communicate with them. That I'm like, often I think a lot of anxiety comes from just not knowing if like your application was read, it was received, what was the feedback from it. That I'm like, I think there is a burden that needs to be placed upon people, recruiting, that communication with the applicant is very, very important. Because I think of myself as, I'm like someone in this gig economy, but a very, very crucial part of like why like I'm able to get work is often because of social capital and like social networks, which I cannot deny that it's not a given for every single person. Like systems at a point at least of communicating, either you have hired someone and maybe what was the reason of like why like someone else didn't get hired, so thing is so that they can improve in that process. That I'm like, I sit back, I'm like, it's not enough for me to say to someone else, just go network, just go do whatever, because ultimately you can still be able to do all of those things and then still end up unemployed. That I'm like, I think it's important that you also gain skills that can be able to earn something, a living. Skills that can be able to solve a problem, essentially. That I'm like, it's great that you go to university, but chances are even after you leave university, you're gonna be asked a question of how much like work experience you have and so forth. Again, the burden then lies upon a lot of these companies, governments, is to say, do we have a very robust internship program that can allow for students that we bring in, either from their first year up until they complete, to be able to gain the type of skills that we would need from them so that we can be able to then retain them at the end of their university degree. And like, you find that a lot of top consulting firms, a lot of big financial firms do this really well, but often they do it for a very small number of people. That I'm like, I think that culture needs to go slightly further, but then also to just acknowledge that actually people that create employment in South Africa, it's small to like medium it's small to medium enterprises quite a lot. So there's a space where then they need to get the type of support to be in an environment where they can continue to create employment, either from procurement moving a lot more faster in government, them being able to get relief aid a lot more faster. So I think that young people actually, I mean, if you look on Twitter, that is probably something that you will just never miss. It's like people have applied for over 100 jobs, but have never heard from even one of them. That I'm like, it is hard to say to that person, just keep on being just keep on being hopeful. That I'm like, people are trying. It's just that often they're just not well communicated with. B, if you're saying to someone, you're just not qualified, I think as a corporate, we then also have to ask ourselves, what have we done to ensure that we are, that the type of talent we want has the type of skills that we actually require them to have to be able to like hire them. So I think an internship program at a university level is very critical, and then being able to support in that journey is also non-negotiable, actually.
Part of my fault. Thank you so much, Obakeng, for your parting shots. And then also just coming to you, Nabentle, with your closing remarks. I mean, for perhaps even a young person who hasn't even fathomed that they could, be an entrepreneur, let alone in the digital economy. I mean, I have to say that it's not as easy as it sounds. It can be quite an intimidating space to get into. The comfort zone could be get the degree, attach it to your CV, and hope for the best. And just ensure that you go to as many, auditions or interviews as possible. But for someone that has even fathomed, taken the route of entrepreneurship, what opportunities then has the digital economy afforded you as a young entrepreneur that you would like to make light of and encourage someone out there to consider entrepreneurship as an opportunity?
For us, the digital economy has given us access to distribution and a marketplace. I'll start off with the first one, being distribution. When we started off our journey, obviously we're pitted up against a lot of these established insurance companies. And there's this famous saying in the insurance industry that insurance isn't bought, it's sold. So here you have this industry where your ultimately your profits are a function of how much you spend in marketing. And as a new player in the game, you obviously don't have that type of budget that can compete against these established players. So what we had to do was become very smart in terms of using what we had at our disposal. And at that time, and still is, social media, right? At the time we started the business, it was around 2016. We were 25 years old. And the three of us co-founders, we had Instagram accounts. So what we did was we created an account for the company, and each of us gave ourselves access to this account, and we started following and engaging with your ordinary young South African. But we did it in such a way that it felt as if there was a human behind that account, as opposed to some sort of marketing manager. So would respond to posts, who would comment on stuff, send DMs and whatnot. And by doing this over the course of about 8-9 months, we built a following of about 40,000 followers on Instagram. And if you compare that to the average following of these traditional insurance companies, a lot of them were averaging around 1,500 followers. So that in itself just shows you that if you actually make smart use of the tools that are at your disposal, you can really, really compete against the big players, because those guys are focusing on the more shiny means of advertising, such as TV, radio, and whatnot. But we had to really become gritty and finding the channels that make sense for us. And the second part of that question is access to marketplace. So as of 2 days ago, we've been fortunate enough to launch an offering in the States in partnership with an insurer that side. But we started this project just as lockdown started, and we finished it 2 days ago. But the amazing thing about the entire project is that we were literally able to do it from our homes and do it remotely. We were writing the code for the app while pretty much lying in bed. And if somebody asked you if this is possible about 15, 20 years ago, it wouldn't have been. You know, if a pandemic like COVID struck at that time and you weren't able to travel to actually meet with the representatives overseas, the project would die straight in its tracks. And being able to participate in the digital economy now means that an African startup can now export technology overseas, whereby historically Africans have been seen as the recipients of international technology. So it's been really amazing to be able to shift out, to put out African technology and show the world that we can to compete at that high level.
Yeah, and what you're saying reminds me that with entrepreneurship comes an opportunity to own the means of production. I mean, if we look at now with COVID-19, I remember we had an interview right here on ENCA where we were talking to a representative from Dinosa about PPE that was meant to be delivered to frontline healthcare workers. And the response from the guest was that, but if we own the means of productions and we have our manufacturing companies, then surely we would not have to wait, for anyone to deliver anything outside of the country. And what you're saying is entrepreneurship brings that opportunity, to own the means of production. But lovely to you, Newa, then, as we come to just the end of our conversation with you panelists. I mean, sure, that Stats SA unemployment, rate really shook everyone. I mean, of course, we're anticipating more bad news as we maneuver and navigate our way through COVID, but at 30.1%, I suppose leaves more vulnerable youth in the labor market, right? So then how do you think, youth unemployment then can be alleviated in South Africa, and not only because of the pandemic, but even for future prospects? Because if the youth accounts for 60% of the population, and we're seeing this even in the continent, then surely they are most affected by unemployment.
I think one of the things that a few people are very disappointed with at the beginning of the year before the pandemic is how little youth unemployment was mentioned in the budget speech. And then with the supplementary one, we were expecting something from the finance ministry regarding youth unemployment, and very limited things were promised. And I think the most important thing right now is to make sure that we cushion young people who are currently unemployed from the brunt of, absolute poverty, because that's what we need to deal with in the immediate. We need to make sure that when people have absolutely no income coming in, that the state can support them. And I think the COVID grant is very, very good for that. But outside of that, when we're trying to not even just grow the economy, but keep it from collapsing too hard, what government needs to do is we can't be having these very sort of prudent fiscal decisions. I think this is a time when, if you're going to have any time where government spending needs to go up in order to make sure people's jobs are safe, it's right now. So what we need to do is we need to keep funding businesses. We need to keep funding people that currently don't have access to the marketplace in terms of labor. We need to give people that need UIF, we need to give them UIF. And we need to make sure that when the time comes where doors are open to certain businesses, that those businesses have patrons. That's ultimately the really, really important facet of what's going to happen with the post-COVID economy. Demand side economics is going to become really, really important, and we're going to have to make sure that in order for businesses to retain the people that they currently have, whether they are restaurants or businesses that are serving the restaurants and offering services in the supply chain, in order for that to keep flowing, we need to make sure that consumers have money to spend, and we need to make sure that when people are retained by businesses don't do the very exploitative thing that's very popular in South Africa, where whenever they can make a profit, they don't mind cutting down on the number of people that work for them. So right now, retrenchments have taken place because of the economic downturn, but once recovery begins, you're going to have businesses that don't hire those people back. That needs to stop, and government policy needs to make sure that those exploitative labor practices stop as well, because what happens is that businesses would rather have a larger cut for their shareholders and larger profits than to make sure that people are working in the economy, and it doesn't benefit anyone, because at the end of the day, those people that businesses are making sure don't have a job were the same people that were going to come and spend by them. So it's very, very important right now for businesses, as prudent as they need to be, as secure as they need to be. We need to make sure that we're very ethical with our business practices and we don't put profits before people, because we've seen that long term that stagnates growth. It may benefit individual businesses here and there, especially monopolists, but in the long term, being very, very stingy with the amount of people that we're going to employ, refusing to give people jobs, refusing to be very expansionary in our business practices, it doesn't benefit anyone in the long term. It just harms the economy.
Well, thank you for pointing that out. And just also to bring it to just what's been happening right now with COVID. I mean, reports are continuously coming from, workers that there are businesses or the employers that would apply for UIF, but the employees would not benefit from that application. And you find businesses in a position where they further exploit workers by making them work longer hours, not being paid overtime. Hence, they are benefiting because they want the necessarily shareholders and individuals to profit. So it's important just to make that call to say that let people, your workers, benefit from your company. Should not put profit before business. But thank you so much, Newo Musala, for that engagement. And Ndabentle Ngulube, thank you so much for your input. Obakeng Lisiani, I appreciate you coming as well. Tando Hopa, thank you so much for your input. I think everything that you've shared with myself, with young people watching right now, you've really challenged every single young and old South African to be the change that they want to see and to do it from their corner. I think sometimes you expect the pedestal and the applause. But it's that one starfish that you throw back into the ocean and whose life you change that equally makes a bigger impact. And I think with everything that you've shared here, you just said in whatever community you come from, where you are, the change lies in you. You have all it takes. Thank you so much for reminding us of the power that ignites within all of us as young people. But with that being said, then I'd like to just invite back Dr. Precious Moloi-Motsepe. I hope she's back with us. There she is, I can see her. And just to give us closing remarks, of course, as our host from the Motsepe Foundation. Ma, the floor is yours.
Wow, what can I say really? Thank you so much, Dumelo. You've been a fantastic facilitator for these two sessions. Thank you very much. Jamie Lee, Fatima, Daphne, Daniel, Tando, Obakeng, Ndabenhle, Newo. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You've been absolutely incredible. You have inspired many people. I am in absolute, I'm so happy that we have young people like yourselves. If I can say from what I heard you guys talked about, education, you want to see a dismantling of stereotypes, through education, unlearning, engagement, speaking up, using all these forums. I've also heard that you're worried about the mismatch between your education and jobs that are available. And there was a fantastic input on how we can bridge that gap through internship programs at universities. I really love that. I've also heard a lot around the importance of accountability, holding our leaders accountable, the importance of transparency, creating systems and consistency. Data was a very, very important point, and we take that integration of data truly, truly important. And I heard that you're tired of talk shops and you want action, and you want action now. So I'm throwing it back at you to say, Tando, Ndabenhle, and the group, how do we move forward to actually make meaningful change? Between now and next year, June month, we need to see real tangible progress. And the foundation is here wanting to partner with young people to assist in whatever way we can. And we've got networks like, there is a very good group called Harambi, I think they're called. They also look at youth unemployment and how to integrate young people into future jobs. So I just want to say how excited I am that the group, young people also at the Motsepe Foundation, Asanda, Andiswa, Tuli, you've been truly phenomenal, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Dumelo.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ma, for your encouraging words. And thank you so much for, I think, constantly putting yourself at the front line to extend your hand to young people, be it through, conversation on platforms like these, through your philanthropy, through the work that you do, not only in the country, but in the continent, around the world, to remind us of the fire that ignites in us. We appreciate it. Thank you so much for this platform. And thank you to each and every young South African in the comments, in the chat tab, in the Q&As who've engaged. That is a sign of young leaders who want to be counted, who are saying, we are tired of the misrepresentation. We are here. We have ideas. They're innovative. And we are ready to work. So thank you so much to each and every one of you for also engaging from where you are. But with that being said, thank you so much to the Motsepe Foundation for this platform. Thank you to all our panelists. Thank you to all the youth leaders and queens and kings behind the scenes that you may not see, that are making sure we are not disconnected, because hey, that hasn't fallen, but they are like, we shall be heard. So thank you so much. Abu Budmanda, I heard you, I didn't see you, but thank you to everyone for helping and making this possible. I appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. You can applaud yourselves.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.